Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. This is Momo. For today's DIY, I'm going to be attempting this puff sleeve dress pattern by McCall's. Off the bat, I already know that I'm going to have to make some adjustments to the pattern, but I'm going to try it out and we'll see how it looks. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Let's get started. I'm using this beautiful mint green fabric that has been in my stash for ages, and it has these cute little flowers and leaves embroidered all over it. It is a little sheer, but I'm going to fix that by adding a lining to the bodice. My fabric is a little shorter than what the requirements call for, but because there aren't any special grain lines or anything, I was able to make the pattern pieces fit. I used the top corner for the sleeves. The longest folded section was reserved for the ruffle part of the skirt. And then this little bottom corner here was actually just wide enough to fit the bodice for the size that I wanted to make. I took the two pieces apart and folded each of them in half. In order to shorten the pattern to fit my petite frame, I actually only kept 2 of the original waistlines. I added 1 inch above the top waistline, and then took the whole width and drew a line down the middle. That brings the waist a little higher, and at the same time, it is right below my bust. Repeat the same thing for the back, and that completes all of the pattern pieces. As you can see here, I also added a lining piece for the bodice part of the dress. I matched up the lining to the wrong side of the dress and pinned along the 3 lines at the waist. This is going to help keep everything flat. And then I went ahead and base stitched the top together. According to the instructions, I'm supposed to use a bias tape to create the casings at the waist. But because I actually have 2 layers of fabric already, I'm going to go ahead and sew 2 stitch lines right along each of the 3 guide lines that I drew earlier. This is going to create each of the 3 casings for the smocked waist. Repeat on the back and match the front and back together. Sew along the sides, skipping right over each of the 3 casings. I know the stitching looks kind of bad here. I did try playing around with the tension, but it was either too tight or too loose. I'm not too worried about this because the elastic is going to help cover this up. Stabilize the inner corner of the sleeve. I totally failed at recording this step, but this is what it looks like. Next, I drew a guide line along the shoulder part of the sleeve that was 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. clip each of the inner corners. The instructions actually call for a single fold bias tape, but I only have a double folded bias tape. So what I did was I opened up the double folded bias tape and then opened up one of the folds. Press it open. With the right sides facing together, pin the bias tape along the guideline from earlier. So right along the original fold line. For this entire dress, anytime you're working with the bias tape, make sure to fold the ends right over to the wrong side of the bias tape. Trim off the excess seam allowance and flip the entire bias tape to the wrong side of the sleeve. So right along the edge, and this is the casing on the shoulder. Take a piece of elastic and insert it through the casing. Sew the ends down. Once that's all complete, fold the sleeve in half and sew the raw edge together. To create the casing towards the bottom portion of the sleeve, I took the same bias tape from earlier, but this time I only opened it up once so that it technically is a single fold bias tape. Pin it right along the guideline from the pattern. Sew along the top and bottom, making sure to fold the ends of the bias tape under. Hem the sleeve by folding it under twice. Take some elastic and insert it through the casing. Sew the ends together. So the dress doesn't look very promising at this point, does it? Never judge a pattern until you finish it. Take the remaining raw edge of the sleeve and pin it to the bodice. base stitch it in place. Create a casing along the top part of the dress using the same method that was used to create the casing along the shoulders of the sleeve. That means pressing the bias tape open and attaching it to the top part of the dress. Snip off any excess allowance and flip the whole thing over to the wrong side of the dress, and then stitching it in place. I have to say, it was a little tricky to sew along the sleeve because it was kind of hard to get into that inner corner. I would recommend to go back and hand stitch that area just to reinforce it and make sure that you're able to catch all of the raw edges. In order to keep the two layers of the dress together and to also give it a cleaner look, I hemmed the layers together using a very small zigzag stitch. Now it's time to add the elastic. This part is pretty self-explanatory. I took some elastic and inserted through all of the casings at the top and the waist, and then stitched the ends together. Because I didn't use bias tape to create the casing for my waist, I had separate casings on the front and then separate casings on the back. So I had to insert my elastic separately and then sew along both sides of the dress. Take the ruffles and sew the ends together. This is going to create a really long continuous single piece. Hem the top and bottom by folding them under twice and stitching it in place. The top is 1/4 of an inch and the bottom is a tad bit wider at 5/8 of an inch. The pattern provides a few marks for matching the ruffle to the skirt, but I would also recommend to mark the center front as well as the center back on both the ruffle and the skirt. Gather the top part by using a really long straight stitch. Place the ruffle right on top of the skirt so that both the skirt and the ruffle have right sides facing up. Make sure to match up the side seams as well as any other matching points. Sew it in place and go slow, making sure to fix the ruffles wherever necessary. So I thought I was done, and I was super excited, but it turns out that the sleeves are actually too big for my liking, and the hem actually sits at an awkward spot right where my knees are at. I kind of actually felt like a clown in this, so I left the dress hanging for about 2 months. But at the end of the day, I really like this fabric, so out came the seam ripper. I made the sleeve a little more narrow by removing about 1.5 inches from the total width of the sleeve, as well as some fabric from the edges. I also shortened the sleeve and added the elastic right to the hem. I shortened the skirt as well as the ruffle. And then I went back and reattached the bias tape, regathered, rehem, all that jazz, this is what the final dress looks like. I think the sleeves look a lot better now that they're a little bit smaller and the dress is a little bit shorter. Overall, I really like the way that it turned out and I'm actually looking forward to wearing it. I hope you guys enjoyed this DIY and I hope that you learned something from it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and I will see you in the next video. Bye!